Guys, this is Chris with ResolutelyReady. This time I'd like to talk to you about aquaponics. Aquaponics is not something people are real familiar with, and so let's start with what is it and how does it work. Aquaponics is really the bringing together of two different disciplines, aquaculture and hydroponics, and as you blend those words together you get aquaponics. So let's talk about that to start. Aquaculture. It's essentially fish farming. It could be shrimp or other seafood type things, but essentially it's fish farming in just a simple way of explaining it. One of the problems you run into with aquaculture, not a big deal, but it's something you have to deal with, and it is the fact that ammonia is a byproduct of fish waste, and it eventually builds up in a system and can be toxic to the fish. So you have to have fairly large filter systems to filter that ammonia out. And so that's something that you have to deal with aquaculture. Hydroponics is the growing of food in water without soil. Now, one of the challenges you run into with hydroponics is you constantly have to add nutrients to your water. Plants don't want to grow in just clean water. They have to have some kind of nutrients in there to grow on, and you have to add that because you're not growing it in the soil where they might get it that way. So what aquaponics does is it mixes those two, and the fish water essentially gets pumped into a grow box, which is where your plants are. The plants absorb the nutrients put off by the fish, cleaning the water for the fish. So let me give you a little bit more detail on how that works. Ammonia, as I said earlier, is a waste byproduct from fish. And there's a naturally occurring bacteria, and it's called ammonia oxidizing bacteria. Nothing creative there. But what it does is over time it will naturally develop on surface area where ammonia water is present and where it can get oxygen. So what you do is you run this ammonia water through some kind of a media. In an aquarium, it's often like a sponge, so it has lots of surface area to grow its bacteria on. And so what it does is it grows that bacteria, which eats the ammonia and produces something called nitrite. That attracts a different kind of naturally occurring bacteria, and it actually eats the nitrite. It's nitrite oxidizing bacteria, and it converts the nitrite into something called nitrate. Well, nitrate, as it turns out, is a great plant fertilizer. So the plants suck up that nitrate out of the water and they grow like crazy. So in fact, lettuce can grow from pretty well start to finish in about 30 to 40 days. And out in a flower bed or something, it's going to be 50 to 60 days. So it really shortens the time span of growing some of this produce. So that's kind of the technical of how this would work. Let's talk about these different kinds of aquaponics systems. There's three primary types of systems. The first one's something called deep water culture. It's also known as a raft system, and this picture kind of illustrates why. These are rafts of foam with holes cut in them, and the roots grow out the bottom and hang down in the water, and they generally like to have their water 10 to 12 inches deep for the roots to have lots of room to grow, and so they call it deep water, 10 to 12 inches deep water culture growing or raft system. The second kind is called a nutrient film technique. What this is referring to is taking the nutrient water and running it in a thin film in trays underneath the plants, and the roots kind of hang down into that thin film of maybe a 1/4 inch deep of water or something. So it just gravity flows back into the tank. So it's pumped up to the top, runs through a series of channels back into where the fish are. That's how that one works. The third one is called a media bed system. Media bed systems really can break down several different ways. Two primary kinds. And I'll just talk about those kind of quickly. One is a chiffed pist, or CHOP, which is those are acronyms for a simple flood and drain or an ebb and flow system. Let's talk about the acronyms first. They're constant height in fish tank, so your fish tank remains constant, and there's a pump in a sump tank. And I'll show you a picture of that here in a second, but somebody got smart and thought, that may explain it well, but that's a mouthful and it doesn't sound very polite. So they came up with CHOP, or constant height one pump, sort of an abbreviated version of the chiffed pist. This is what that would look like. So you have the fish tank, and the blue box there in the center toward the bottom is a part of that sump tank. The black box there at the bottom represents the pump, and it's pumping water up through that green line back up into the fish tank. And it remains a constant level because it's flowing out at the same rate through that blue tube into the grow box. Filling that grow box, the media bed fills it up to a certain height. Then there's a siphon that kicks on and dumps all the water out into the sump tank. Well, the whole time it's been pumping water out of the sump tank water level has been dropping because it's pumping all its water out while it's filling the top media bed. Then it reverses, dumps all the water out of the media bed, refilling the sump pump. And so the water levels in the sump tank and the media bed are kind of 180 degrees from each other. They just, when one is filling, the other is draining. When one is draining, the other is filling. And so that keeps a constant height in your fish tank. And there's just one pump that runs the whole system. So that's what this one's about. The other way to do these media bed systems are called a constant flood or continuous flow. They're also referred to as deep water culture with media. So what we're really saying there is, instead of using a foam floating raft, you simply fill 12 inches of rock and then have 10 inches of water or 11 inches of water. So it's just constant height of water. It doesn't ebb and flow. It just remains the same height all the time. This is kind of what one of those might look like, just a picture representing it. It fills to a certain height that goes through the overflow and then right back into the bottom. So that's it. I found this one other picture I thought was interesting. It's got a fish tank. The water then pumps up through a couple filter tanks there at the top, back through a nutrient film technique method where it's running through the pipe, watering the plants that would be growing in the top of the pipe. Then it runs into a media bed system, which is probably an ebb and flow, and it flows up and down, which would then run from there back over into the raft method. And as it's flowing in, it's flowing out. And so what would happen is the fish tank level there is rising and falling. So it's not a constant height. It's probably a one pump system, but the reason I included it is I just thought it was a good way of seeing all the different kinds all incorporated into one. So if this has been informative or helpful, entertaining, whatever, give us a thumbs up, and if you would subscribe, it really helps the channel and we appreciate it a lot. And you can continue to watch us on our journey of becoming more resolutely ready.